The candlelight flickers against the damp stone walls of the scriptorium. You are a monk in 9th century France, and for 3 days, your world has been the sharp scratch of your quill on a fresh manuscript. Halfway through the 3rd page, the heavy wooden door creaks open. Your abbot walks in. He stands behind you, reading over your shoulder in total silence. Then, without saying a word, he reaches down and removes 4 pages from your stack. He turns and leaves. By morning, those pages are nothing but gray ash in the courtyard fire. By the time your grandchildren are born, no one will ever know those words existed. You have just participated in one of the oldest, most consistent acts in human civilization, the quiet editing of the past. Between the years 500 and 1200, Europe's entire memory was controlled by fewer than 3,000 literate men. Every king's decree and every battle record passed through monastic hands. The monks weren't exactly lying, they were curating, and choosing what to keep is the ultimate power. If you want to discover how these hidden choices shaped our world, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Thrones History. The system looked stable, but its survival depended entirely on who held the pen. When a monastery burned, history didn't just disappear, it left no gap behind. The editing happened invisibly, in trimmed margin notes or in stories of saints whose miracles multiplied across retellings. You are still that monk. You finish your work and do not ask about the missing pages. You understand that your job is not to preserve everything, but only what survives inspection. You will never know that what you copied, not what you burned, became history. To truly understand how those missing pages change everything, we have to look at the bigger picture of the world back then. Between the years 500 and 1200, the continent of Europe was a vast, chaotic place filled with millions of ordinary people living their daily lives. Yet, the entire institutional memory of this world was held in the hands of fewer than 3,000 literate men. Think about that number for a moment. That is a population smaller than a single modern high school, completely responsible for managing the history of an entire continent. Every king's royal decree, every record of a bloody battle, and every fierce religious argument had to pass through a tiny, quiet room just like yours before it could survive the test of time. It is easy to look back from our modern world and think these medieval monks were lying or trying to trick us on purpose, but the truth is much simpler and far more dangerous. They weren't lying. They were curating. Think of a curator at a museum. They cannot fit every single painting in the building onto the display walls, so they choose only a few to hang up for the public to see. The major problem is that when you choose what to keep, you are also making a silent choice about what to throw away. Curation is selection, and selection is pure power. By deciding which stories were worth the expensive ink and parchment, these few men silently decided what future generations would believe about the past, shaping our modern reality from the shadows of their scriptoriums. As your mentor, I want you to look at this data as a powerful lesson for how we manage our own minds today. We often believe that what we read in books or see on screens is the complete, unaltered truth. But we must realize that all information has been filtered by someone before it ever reaches our eyes. If you want to protect your own understanding, you have to look past what is easily available. You need to ask yourself who selected the information you are consuming and what might have been left on the cutting room floor. True wisdom comes from recognizing that the stories missing from the record are often just as important as the ones that survived. On the outside, this entire system of preserving history looked as solid and stable as the massive stone walls of the monasteries themselves. It seemed like a safe, permanent way to keep the past alive for future generations. But underneath that calm surface lay a hidden fragility. The survival of everything people knew about the world depended entirely on a very small group of individuals. Literally, it depended on who held the pen. When history is kept in only a few quiet, scattered rooms across a continent, it becomes incredibly easy to destroy, even by accident. Imagine a massive school library where every single book is unique, with no extra copies anywhere else in the world. If that library catches fire, the knowledge inside it doesn't just burn, it vanishes from human memory forever. In those days, if a war broke out or a lightning bolt struck and the right monastery burned to the ground, the historical record didn't just get a hole in it. The record disappeared completely without leaving any gap behind. It is like a thread being pulled from a piece of cloth so perfectly that you cannot even tell a thread was ever missing. Because there were no other copies to compare it to, no one in the next town or the next century even knew there was something to look for. No one knew to mourn what was never mentioned. This creates a major problem for how we understand human history, and it offers a deep lesson for how we live today. We usually only think about the stories we can read, but the truest parts of the past might be the things that were lost before anyone could copy them down. The danger of a fragile system isn't just that information gets lost. It is that the loss is totally invisible to the people who come later. We are left looking at a picture of the past that seems complete, but is actually missing major pieces. When a story disappears without a trace, the real people who lived it are erased too. They become ghosts in a history book that has been quietly shortened, leaving us to wonder how much of our own modern understanding is built on a foundation of completely invisible gaps. As your mentor, my advice to you is to build systems in your own life that are not so fragile. Do not rely on just one source for your facts, your memories, or your daily plans. If you back up your digital files in only one place, or trust only one voice for your news, you are living in your own fragile monastery. To truly protect your future, you must create duplicates and seek out diverse perspectives. Always remember that the most dangerous errors are the ones that leave no trace behind, so actively look for the gaps before they disappear forever. This invisible shift in history did not happen with a loud announcement or a public celebration. It did not declare itself to the world. Instead, the editing of the past happened in the quietest ways possible, completely out of sight. It happened when a tired scribe was copying an old book and decided to trim away the messy notes written in the margins of the page. Those tiny handwritten notes often contained the real, everyday thoughts of the people who lived through major events, but to the next copier, they just looked like clutter. By cutting them off to make the new book look neat and clean, decades of human experiences were tossed onto the floor and lost forever. Other times, the shift happened right in the middle of a grand story. You can find ancient history books today that suddenly begin right in the middle of a king's rule, acting as if the early years of his life simply did not exist. The messy mistakes of his youth, the bad decisions, or the political failures were wiped away cleanly. The new version of the book simply acts as if the king was always perfect and always in charge from the very first day. It is like editing a video to start only after a major mistake has already been made, hiding the truth from anyone who watches it later. We can also see this invisible shift in the stories of the saints from that time. In the very first records, these saints were described as regular human beings who struggled, made mistakes, and tried their best to do good. But as the centuries rolled on and the stories were copied over and over again, something changed. With every new retelling, their miracles seemed to multiply. A saint who originally healed one sick person was suddenly described as healing an entire city. A simple act of kindness turned into a grand, magical event. Eventually, the real human being underneath all those layers of exaggeration became completely unreachable. The true person was buried beneath a mountain of golden words. This is how history changes when we are not looking. It does not happen all at once through a massive, evil plan. It happens through tiny, daily choices made by people who think they are just doing their jobs. When we look back at these old documents, we have to realize that we are not seeing a perfect window into the past. We are looking at a heavily edited highlight reel. If we want to understand our world today, We have to learn to look between the lines and recognize that what is left out of the story is often just as important as what is left in. Now, let us return to that quiet room where we started. You are still that monk, sitting at your wooden desk with the heavy ink staining your fingers. The room has grown cold, and the candle has burned down to a tiny stub of wax. You dip your quill into the dark ink one last time and write the very final word of the manuscript. Your hand aches from hours of careful work, and your eyes are blurry from staring at the pages in the dim light. But even as you set your pen down and stretch your tired back, your mind keeps wandering to the 4 pages your abbot took away. You do not ask anyone about those missing pages. You do not whisper about them to the other monks at dinner, and you do not write a secret note to complain. In this world, you understand the rules perfectly without anyone ever having to state them out loud. You know deeply that your job is not to save every single piece of information that comes through the door. Your true job is to preserve only what survives the inspection of the people in charge. It is a hard truth to accept, but it is the way your world stays organized and safe. You pack up your tools, clean your desk, and look at the neat stack of newly copied pages. You feel a sense of pride in your work, believing you have saved something important for the future. But there is a huge twist that you will never live to see. You will never know that the words you spent days carefully copying down, and not the words that were thrown into the fire and turned to ash, are the exact words that became official human history. This is a powerful lesson for how we live our lives today. We often think that history is a collection of everything that ever happened, but it is really just a collection of the things that were allowed to survive. Just like that medieval monk, we are often working with a version of reality that has been filtered before it ever reaches us. When we read a book, watch a news report, or look at a post online, we are only seeing the pages that passed inspection. If we want to be truly smart and aware, we have to remember the quiet monk at his desk. We must understand that what is missing from the record is often the very thing that would change how we see everything.
It is very easy to look at this system and assume that the church set out on a grand mission to lie about the past. We want to believe there was a dark room filled with leaders planning a massive cover-up. But the truth is much less dramatic and honestly, a lot scarier. The church did not try to falsify history on purpose. That is simply not how institutional memory corruption works. It does not happen because of widespread evil. It happens because of everyday incentives. An incentive is just a reward that makes people want to behave in a certain way. And in the medieval world, those rewards shaped every single word that stayed alive on the page. To see how this works, we have to look at the money trail. Writing a book back then was not cheap. It took months of labor, expensive animal skins for parchment, and rare ingredients for ink. Because it was so costly, a monk couldn't just copy whatever he found interesting. What got copied was what got funded by wealthy people. And who were these wealthy people? They were powerful kings, rich noblemen, and church leaders. Naturally, what got funded was what flattered the patron. A rich king was only going to pay for a history book if it made his ancestors look like heroes and his enemies look like villains. No one fills the pockets of a scribe who writes about their failures. Therefore, what flattered the patron is what ultimately survived the century. The books that criticized the rulers or told a different side of the story were simply left on the shelves to rot, get eaten by mice, or be scraped clean to reuse the expensive parchment for something else. The system of history was built perfectly to transmit information across time. It was an amazing network of libraries and scribes, but it was absolutely not built to transmit that information neutrally. It was a machine designed to pass down a specific, approved message, and it filtered out anything that did not pay its own way. This gives us a major piece of advice for dealing with information in our own modern lives. We must stop looking for a single bad guy who is trying to trick us, and start looking at the incentives of the systems around us. When you open an app, watch a video, or read an article, You have to ask yourself a simple question. Who paid for this to exist? Just like the medieval patrons, the people who fund modern information networks have goals. If we want to find the real truth, we have to look past the stories that are easy to find and actively search for the pieces that the system chose not to fund. Only then can we see the whole picture. Once a system starts to favor certain stories over others, a powerful domino effect begins. This is what we call the cascade, and it changes how history is formed over long periods of time. The process is simple but devastating. One edited history book, created by a monk who left out a few inconvenient truths to please his king, becomes the main source of information for the next historian 50 years later. That new historian reads the book and assumes it is completely accurate. He does not know about the missing pages or the trimmed margins, so his own writing is based entirely on a flawed record. As time marches forward, that second historian's gaps become the permanent foundation for the next writer in line. Think of it like a game of telephone, where one person whispers a phrase into the ear of the next person, and it travels down a long line of people. By the time the message reaches the fifth generation of copying, the original omission is not a personal choice anymore. The people writing the books are no longer actively deciding to hide the truth. Instead, the missing information is just the natural shape of the historical record. The gap has become completely invisible because there is nobody left alive who remembers what was actually lost. At this late stage in the cascade, absolutely no one is lying to you. Every single writer is working with complete honesty, trying their absolute best to record the facts. The problem is that everyone is working from incomplete material that was ruined decades before they were even born. Because of this, the error compounds silently over the centuries. To compound means to multiply or build upon itself, growing larger and larger with each passing step. And because these books are kept in grand libraries and signed by respected leaders, this growing error carries total institutional legitimacy. It looks completely official, it feels true, and it is backed by the highest authorities in the land, even though it is built on a foundation of empty space. This gives us a vital piece of advice for how we think about the information we use today. We have to all realize that false ideas do not always come from people who are trying to deceive us. Often, bad information comes from good people who are simply passing down an old mistake that they believe is true. When you are researching a topic, whether for school, work, or your own personal growth, you cannot just trust a fact because it appears in 5 different places. You have to trace the information back to its original source. If all 5 of those places got their data from the exact same flawed website or book, then you are just looking at a modern version of the medieval cascade. To protect your mind, always look for the root of the story. When we look back at the ancient world, it is easy to think of history as a massive, complete library. But the reality is a sharp slap in the face. Modern historians estimate that fewer than 1% of all the documents produced in the ancient world have survived to the present day. Let that number sink into your mind for a moment. Out of every 100 books, letters, and records written by our ancestors, 99 of them are completely gone. We are trying to understand the story of humanity by looking at just one tiny shattered piece of a puzzle that contains 100 parts. It is a common myth that this massive loss of knowledge was caused by grand tragedies like violent wars or accidental fires. We love to blame the burning of famous libraries for our ignorance, but the data tells a completely different story. This loss was not mostly caused by war and fire. It was caused by something much more ordinary: selection. In the centuries before printing presses existed, books did not last forever. The ink would fade and the animal skins would rot. To keep a book alive, someone had to sit down and copy the entire thing by hand before the old copy wore out. If no one chose to copy it, the book died. This means that entire legal traditions, advanced medical systems, deep philosophical schools, and loud political arguments simply did not make the cut. They were left on shelves to turn into dust because a small group of leaders decided they were not worth the time or the effort to save. The human cost of this filtering is devastatingly concrete. The people who held those lost ideas were absolutely real. They had faces, they had families, and they had names. They spent their entire lives thinking, dreaming, and writing down their truths, believing their words would matter to the future. Instead, they are now completely erased, turning into empty gaps that we do not even know to look for in our modern world. This realization carries a deep piece of advice for how we navigate our own lives today. We must never fall into the trap of believing that the loudest or most popular ideas are the only ones that matter. Just because an idea did not survive the test of time does not mean it was wrong or useless. It simply means it did not serve the interests of the people who held the power to copy it down. In your own life, when you are looking for solutions to complex problems, do not just look at the popular trends of today. Dig deeper. Search for the forgotten perspectives and the quiet voices that didn't make the front page, because the exact answers you need might be hidden in the gaps that the world chose to leave behind. All of this brings us to the present day, where we find ourselves looking into a giant mirror. We no longer live in a world of quiet rooms and fading ink. Instead, we live in an era of total documentation. Think about your daily life. Every single text message you send, every photo you post, and every digital transaction you make is recorded somewhere in a massive computer network. Our world has generated more data than any other civilization in the entire history of the human race. It feels like we have finally solved the problem of the missing past, because we are saving absolutely everything. But as your mentor, I need to tell you a difficult truth. Having a mountain of data does not solve our problem. In fact, it creates a brand new danger. In the past, the threat was that there was too little information, so things were easily lost. Today, the threat is that there is too much information, so things are easily hidden. What we cannot guarantee is that volume solves the problem of truth. We might be saving every single word, but if a story is buried under billions of other posts, it is just as invisible as a page burned by a medieval abbot. This is where the new power dynamic comes into play. In the old days, the abbot or the king decided what stayed in the library. Today, whoever controls the computer algorithm decides what surfaces on your screen. An algorithm is just a set of rules that decides what you see first when you open your phone. The math behind these systems is complex, but the human result is simple. What surfaces on the feed becomes what people read, what they share, and ultimately what they believe actually happened. The things that the algorithm ignores simply sink to the bottom and disappear from human sight. Therefore, the deepest lesson here isn't really about medieval monks, old parchment, or missing manuscripts. It is about a timeless truth of human power. It is about who gets to define the shape of the record and how completely invisible that power is to the ordinary people living inside it. When you are scrolling through your phone, you feel like you are making your own choices. You feel free. But you are actually moving through a world where the walls have been built for you by a silent system, filtering your reality every single second. We must take this lesson and turn it into actionable advice for our lives right now. Do not be passive consumers of information. Whether the history being written about us right now is the true history that will survive into the future is, for now, an open question. To protect your own mind, you must become your own active curator. Do not just look at what the algorithm hands to you on a silver platter. Dig deeper, ask questions, and look for the hidden stories, because the shape of your reality depends entirely on what you choose to see.